Hello, everyone, and welcome to ReadySetCyber, an ongoing discussion around the issues and solutions in cybersecurity. I'm Elizabeth Perry, and your host for today's show. Never mind the buzzwords. Who's guarding your front door? Today, we're putting aside the buzzwords, no zero trust hype, no excessive use of acronyms, no pitches, just the fundamentals of cyber. If an attacker shows up at your front door today, who's guarding it? Or perhaps the more urgent question is, what's letting them in? Joining me today is an incredible panel of experts to my whatever side that is. Welcome, everybody. Weighing in with varying perspectives from the front lines of cyber. Audience, we know you have choices on how you spend your day, so we're grateful to have you with us. Most importantly, this is an open conversation and interactive, and we want to hear from you. If you're joining us live, please type any questions or comments into the chat, and we'll do our best to address them in real time. If you're watching the recording, please reach out via the comment section, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Now let's jump in and meet our panelists. First up, Heath Spencer. Hi, Heath. From CEO of Traitware, focused on simplifying enterprise authentication and making strong identity security usable in the real world. Heath joins us from Reno, Nevada. Welcome, Heath.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Next up, Darren Mott. Darren, you get around. He's on TV a lot, so it's nice to have you with us. Former FBI Cyber Division with Five Eyes, joins from Huntsville, Alabama. Darren brings real-world investigative experience into how attackers operate, how breaches unfold, and how to better protect our digital valuables. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, Corey Munson, coming to us from Des Moines, Iowa, is enterprise security leader with PCmatic. He has deep experience in identity risk and security at scale inside organizations. Welcome, Corey.
Thank you.
All right. And last but not least, we have Ricoh Danielson joining us from Scottsdale, Arizona. Is he a GRC risk and compliance leader and enterprise CISO? He's focused on aligning security strategy with business risk and regulatory reality. Welcome all again, and thanks for being here. So, jumping in, a question for all of you. In plain terms, what is the front door in cybersecurity day? We always talk about how the front door needs to be protected. Heath?
Well, I think the front door is basically just, whatever you use to access whatever tool you're using, right? We don't necessarily think of front doors or back doors or side doors. And I think there's whether you're using tools for your job, what you do as an employee or running a company, or what you use just in your daily life as a consumer, it's where do you go to enter whatever application or tool that is, that would be the front door. It could be your Netflix account, right? You that could be through your TV, could be through an app on your phone, right? Just depends on the location, right? The front door is wherever you're going to visit, whatever tool you need to use in the cyber world.
Mm-hmm. All right, Darren, do you have another perspective on that?
Yes, I'm going to give you a one that may not have been thought of, but for businesses, this is particularly important. And some background, I do a lot of expert witness stuff for data breach cases, largely for the plaintiffs, and talking about risks to the victims who lost their PII. One of the things that I've seen in at least 3 of these cases is that the front door was the help desk or the customer service department for the company, where the bad guys called and said, hey, my name is whatever, because they had the person's name, they knew where they worked. And I don't have my badge, I can't get into my computer. And the customer service or help desk doesn't even ask legitimate questions to verify they are who they are. They said, well, I really need your badge. Well, I don't have my badge. Okay, what's your name? Okay, what department are you with? Give them the department. Okay, well, here's your badge number, just so you know it for the future. And here, you want me to reset your password? Happy to do so. So there you go.
Yeah. I mean, well, Darren, that applies that just this last week, I have a friend that, someone called his wife and said, hey, you're being hacked. We need you to take these actions right now. So it's not just a support desk. Like, the threat actors are just calling people directly and walking you through your front door, wherever that front door is.
Right. Yeah, good point. Corey? What's your take?
I quickly realized my background by comparison looks like I'm in prison. So I thought about where they in relation to the camera. My very thoughtful answer on this, hopefully kind of echoes what Heath and Darren have just said. I think the front door is anything that's allowed to execute on a system without any type of control. And if you're not controlling that, the front door is probably more wide open than we truly even know.
All right. And Ricoh, you're up.
Yeah. So in a prior life, worked about 1,500 different cyber breaches and also sat with general counsel and whatnot for different type of breaches. And the first thing I always think about, not only from an enterprise CISO perspective, but also from like just a regular IT and security perspective, is the overall threat landscape of what a threat model might look like for your organization, right? If you look at it from an attacker, they're like, hey, anything and everything goes through, right? If you look at Scattered Spider, if you look at Skinny Spider as well, the different attributes and also different methodologies, the TTPs and IOCs is unscrupulous. So I would say any type of edge, any type of interactivity, web application, identity module, or anything like that is kind of, that's the onset of it. And then from there, it just goes a lateral over. So it could be anything and it could be everything. That's the hard part about, having an organization now is your responsibility to ensure that everything's locked down like a submarine, right?
Right. Yeah. Really good points and interesting, differing or varying perspectives on that. So next I want to talk about what actually gets us breached. How are attackers really getting in? Darren, when you look at real incidents, what is the most common path attackers use to get that first foothold?
So when I was with the FBI, I used to do a lot of outreach presentations, and we would say 90% of the cases that we're investigating, which were all intrusion cases, occurred because they had simple credentials. So credential stuffing, logins, passwords, because no multi-factor authentication was turned on. And that is kind of, moved to some third-party vendor stuff as well. So you've got a lot of intrusions that are occurring through misconfigurations of third-party vendors. So while you, as the organization, may be doing everything you're supposed to be doing correctly, the third-party vendor that's actually storing your information or backing up your information or doing whatever to help support your company is not doing the right things. And you didn't take the time to do due diligence and say, okay, third-party vendor, show me your most recent risk assessment, show me what you're doing to keep your controls in place. So failure to recognize those two main areas as one of the main methods that bad guys are getting in is what's still causing breaches upon breaches upon breaches. I mean, there's a reason I'm an expert witness on 28 of these, because they keep happening and people keep getting sued. So if you don't want to get sued, do the basic things to not lose people's PII, and then you'll be in a much better place.
Well, I mean, Darren, one of the first big public ones ever was the Target breach, right? And that's the prime example of third-party vendor. All the consumers know is, hey, why was my credit card information taken from Target? But they don't know that it was the HVAC contractor that installed monitoring systems on those buildings that allowed that lateral move that Ricoh was just talking about, right? They got in somewhere and then moved laterally. And it was was that 2012, 2013 that Target was announced? And, that's third-party vendor.
Sure. One of my first cases I ever worked on in the FBI, it was in 2002, 2003, was the Lowe's intrusion. And it was these guys that they were doing, driving around with a wireless configuration and found some Wi-Fi's at a Lowe's that weren't configured right, got in through the Wi-Fi, and then laterally moved to another Lowe's from Detroit down to Miami, compromised the payment systems, and went from there. So I mean, it goes back a long time. Looking for the easy way, looking for the easy front door, as we have already said.
Right. Yeah. Great points. Corey, what do organizations believe is secure? Consistently turns out to not.
I would say, I think there's a false sense of security around visibility. I mean, visibility, while being incredibly critical overall, if you think about a lot of environments right now, think they're protected with EDR and XDR and the latest shiny object that they've invested in to detect and respond. but there's not a heck of a lot of thought being given to the prevention side of things. And, you know, I sat through a presentation a few weeks ago at a security conference where a guy threw up a slide that said prevention is no longer practical. I would debate that. So I would say, you know, to your question about false sense of security, I think there's a false sense of security built around all these shiny objects that have been invested in, and at the same time lacking some of the fundamental controls on the front end. So you know, the investment's been made at the expense of the fundamentals, unfortunately.
So Liz, does Corey have to pay $1 to the jar because he used EDR? I think that's a buzzword. We're not supposed to use a buzzword.
Well, I was going to say, you spell that out. But yeah, so Ricoh, to you, I mean, we're going to talk more about you know, about the basics. We're just kind of getting started here, so bear with us. Ricoh, where do policies and processes unintentionally create risk?
Yeah, so I've seen many organizations. I think back to a time when I was with the biggest burger flipper in the world, right? And they had all these policies that were so stringent, so difficult. And I'm like, you do realize you can't do the idea or even the practitioner of security without getting your own way, right? And when they got hit and they were trying to deploy multiple EDRs and also endpoints and whatnot, like they just stumbled through their own way and bureaucratic process. So like this inherently made it unreasonable for them to even get, you know, have a faster, they were in a compromise of their own incident response plan. They couldn't even meet their SLAs because there's so much bureaucracy. The other ones is if you're a smaller organization, I've seen this with many startups and whatnot, they want to present as a big organization so they can get the big contracts. But when the big bad, you know, DoD contractor comes out and says, show me, that's the problem, right? When these policies and procedures are just unpractical and, you know, very impractical. So.
Right. Yeah. Heath, what is a simple identity or authentication mistake you see repeatedly?
Well, I mean, I think Ricoh was just speaking to this. It's the other side of convenience, right? So, like, I like to put things in layman's physical terms, right? Just think about how you treat your home or your vehicle, and you have a spare key or a hide key that you leave out for the house cleaner or what, you know, we talked about third-party breach. You gave so-and-so a key, and then, you know, those keys don't have to be authenticated to, or you don't have to prove that you have the right to use that key because you left it just underneath the doormat. Anyone could pick it up and use it. And so the number one probably thing today is still just configuration, right? People, I think Corey said this earlier, is that, you know, it's the door without controls on it, or maybe it has controls, but because you need to allow ease of use or convenience, or because humans like to think that we're efficient, really we're just lazy, we try to find the fastest path away or work around it. If someone tries to put more controls in place that add friction to us, we will immediately try to find the easiest way around those controls. You know, in the digital world, you think about like, oh, I'm just going to store my password in my browser. That's got to be safe, right? So that it just auto-fills it, because it's like I'm using a strong password, but I saved it in my browser. That's like leaving your hide key underneath the doormat, where anyone could just look underneath the doormat and then unlock the locked door.
Right. Yeah, great points. Let's talk about why execution fails. So people know what to do. They know what to put, you know, got to put MFA, right? Says CISA, says everybody else. Why does it fail? So Corey, where do security programs break down when trying to scale basic controls? That makes.
Yeah, I think a lot of it traces back to the fact we design security assuming it's going to be perfectly maintained, and then we hand it off to security teams that are already stretched thin. So, you know, if your control only works when somebody's paying attention, more than likely it's not going to hold up. So a lot of it's the practicality, I think, of just exactly who can handle all that we're throwing at them.
Mhm.
but AI can do everything right on that one. Yeah,
Oh,
perfect.
there's $1.
That's $1.
Yep, easily.
Oh. Yeah. Heath, where does authentication become unnecessarily complex without improving security? Because we talk about MFA all the time.
Well, a lot of the systems that are trying to add layers of security to the person, right? So authentication becomes complex when we enforce, well, your password now must be 20 characters long or some variation of that, include these characters. Oh, and then you've got to enter this second one. And every time that you are reliant, so Corey just made the statement of the control is only as good as the person using it, right? And if the secrets are shareable, they will be shared on purpose or by accident, right? And if we make the secrets where it's very complex for the human, again, going back to that, like we try to be efficient, we will then try to either make them we use the same one over and over so we can remember it, or we store them somewhere where they shouldn't be stored and just auto-filled for us, right? And then that's where it breaks down, is that when we add complexity to the human then just tries to figure out, well, how do I simplify this so that I can still go get my job done more efficiently?
Right. Darren, an interesting question for you, maybe along those lines. What defender behavior do attackers rely on to succeed?
Well, I'm going to go with this, that the defenders are part of the corporation. So the corporate problem funnels down to the defender problem. And it's two basic things that I've seen: that companies think they're too small to be a victim, and that they don't have anything anybody would want. So in most cases, in that case, they don't even have defenders because they don't think they need defenders. Because I call this I've never had a heart attack situation, where it's like saying, I've never had a heart attack, so why do I need to go see a cardiologist about my heart? I've never had a heart attack. So when companies get talked to about cybersecurity, well, I've never had a cybersecurity incident. Why do I need cybersecurity? That's kind of like I don't know if you've ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but there's that creature on the one planet that if you want to avoid it, if you put a towel over your face, if it can't see you, then you can't. If you can't see it, then it can't see you. It's that mentality that, no one's going to come to us. So that's more of a holistic look at this. But I think that obviously there's going to be fatigue when you actually have defenders. There's fatigue, there's misconfigurations. There's one data breach case where the bad guys got in because they misspelled the word Cobalt Strike. They made it one word instead of two. So their controls didn't see when Cobalt Strike came in and compromised the system and started doing stuff. So it's a host of different things that a lot of companies don't recognize or don't want to know who are the threats that are targeting them, and then take the appropriate methodologies to protect against those threats. If they're in the defense space, nation states are coming at them. How are you defending against those nation states? Because probably you're not doing a good enough job for it.
Right. Anybody else on that? Defender behavior? Because that's a big one. Ricoh, where does compliance fall short in driving real security outcomes?
I've seen a lot of compliance departments, a lot of chief compliance department not really truly understand technology or be a technologist. And they will throw these unrealistic, hey, like if you get an example, I came from one of the biggest banks in the world, right? And they were like, hey, according to the SEC, rate requirements, if you have an incident, it's a very vague term, you have 4 hours of report or 2 hours of report. You might as well just pull up a chair, them and the FBI, and just hang out all day, because you're going to have incidents all day. It's just unrealistic. And once you have the enforcement, the compliance enforcement saying, hey, you have to do these things, and that's not the way technology works. It's just unrealistic. But you have to abide by the rules. I think that's kind of where it just falls apart, right? And I'm starting to see now technologists, went to law school myself, I'm starting to see that the law of cyber is very behind technology as it advances and grows. So there's this gap that we're starting to see quite a bit. I see it with cyber insurance companies all the time, because they're issuing out the policy, and whatever works over here, it doesn't work over here, right? So I think that's kind of where law, compliance, and some sort of governance are just falling behind.
Yeah, we saw that with GDPR. We saw that with, other regulations, it's very difficult to regulate, right? This whole, laws are just not there.
One of the requirements, it's NIST, high trust, and so on and so on, right? One thing I always laugh at, and I just say this tongue in cheek, right, is they're like, we need to make sure you're monitoring logs. Okay, like what type of logs? What specifically are you looking for? And they're just like, yes, those. And
Yeah, all of them.
So what happens, let's just say, I said at the executive level as well, it's like, okay, so guys, are we going to cost analysis as well? Like, are you going to like, this is going to be very expensive, glacier services, storages and whatnot. And then the retention, like compliance, like how long do we have to retain? 7 years plus? Okay, now we're talking about a whole nother dynamic of cost, right? And that's where I think the disparity and the gap is just so huge now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's get into solutions and talk about stripping everything down and talk about what actually makes a difference. Heath, what is one change that improves security without adding friction for users?
Well, I mean, without adding friction for users, in any time that you can improve the way that you're controlling the locks, right, to the front door or whatever else, whether you look at FIDO standards, different technologies that are moving towards passwordless MFA, whether that's a passkey. There's a lot of misnomers around biometrics and how those are being used or misused, whether you're going through the airport and those kinds of things. Darren's probably got some experience on trying to help people understand how that could be used better than just a shareable secret. But I think anytime that we can move to phishing resistant MFA or move to passwordless MFA in a good way that gives the user control of it without having to add friction to the user, it improves that front door lock.
Mm-hmm. Darren, what defensive control actually forces attackers to slow down and to change their approach?
When I read this question, I'm like, she's going to make me pay a lot of money here because they're all buzzword numbers, like MFA, application whitelisting, you're welcome, Corey, and other things like that, right? So I'm going to give you a different response that maybe no one had thought about here, maybe no one watching has thought about. And I pushed this for years, but no one ever takes me up on it or listens. So maybe it's useless, but it's kind of how I think. And that's taking a counterintelligence stance within your network. In other words, what I mean is, the way that the FBI stops nation state actors is with counterintelligence capabilities. You can transpose those into your network environment by putting things in place that make it harder for the bad guys to actually get the crown jewels they're looking for. That could be, honeypot systems that say, here's where our crown jewels are. And they spend all day in that honeypot looking for stuff. When all that's honeypot's doing is alerting your defenders that someone's in where they're not supposed to be, that they shouldn't know about. So let's figure out what that is. Especially for nation state actors, putting fictitious documents in that we had, I'll give you a case example. We had a case here where we knew that China was into one of the clear defense contractors and they were looking for a specific item, let's just say. And so we had their engineers duplicate that item into an uncreatable object that would cost $1 trillion to build and would sink upon putting in the water. Right. And so the idea was stick it in there, make them take it. They would then spend a year trying to figure out how to produce it, would cost them money and ultimately. And said, unfortunately, the Department of State and Department of Justice said that's not a good idea because people could end up dying. So they decided against it. But all that to be said. So taking a counterintelligence approach and masking that or putting that on top of your IT strategy. Sorry, there's $1. Then I think that's a way that you could really make it hard for bad actors to get what they're trying to get to when they get into your system.
You could do that on top of counterintelligence, national state threat intelligence, and also insider threat as well. And that'll make it a more robust. Yeah, I'm with you on that one because once you have somebody on the inside, you definitely have insider threat like corporate espionage, right? So.
Yep.
And Ricoh, I have a question for you. What is one step that improves both security posture and operational clarity?
What is one step towards? Is that what you said?
What is one step that improves security posture and operational clarity? Like,
Definitely, like, if you look at it from an executive or like a CISO or anything like that, like understanding your business, right? You got to definitely understand your business, because what makes sense in the manufacturing doesn't make sense in the healthcare or the burger flipping industry, and then standardizing that and also kind of like securing around that. What I see happening in the next future state here real shortly is the adoption of SDLC, software development lifecycle, and also a privacy first or privacy forward or secure privacy forward, and secure by design. I think those are the fundamental things. Even if you're not a developer, you're designing your platform, your process, your procedure, your whatever with these two things in the forward. I think it would be the most proactive way of getting ahead of things.
Corey, along those lines, what is a control that works reliably at enterprise scale?
Well, since Darren already flagged the technology that my company works on as a buzzword, watch how I thread this needle, Darren.
You're working together.
Yeah, well, I would argue the controls that hold up best and scale are the ones that don't require you to predict an attack. So assuming more of a default deny type of approach, I think it's a lot more practical given the wide scale of the potential threats and who knows the vulnerability apocalypse that is soon coming our way, right? So taking a different approach to how you're dealing with everything that's attempting to execute in your environment and denying by default. I think it the idea that we can recognize every threat is simply not practical anymore, and there's a control that's worth examining to address that directly.
Anyone else on that? Before we start talking about what people need to do now. So, Darren, you walk into a new environment. What do you fix first?
Well, I think there's two things that I look at. A, what do I not want stolen? What's the important thing that I have to protect? And is it being protected currently correctly? And if not, I need to fix that. Meaning, who has access to these crown jewels? Is it everybody? Can everybody get to it anytime they want? That's an access problem. Is it in an isolated network that's hard to get to, that's segmented? Sorry, that's $1. Then, if it's not, maybe we need to do that. And then the other thing I would say is, do you understand who's even targeting you? Because I say this on my podcast all the time. You have to understand the threats targeting you so you can assess your risk and then proceed wisely. If you don't know who's attacking you, who's coming at you, and why they're coming at you, then how can you defend against what you don't know is coming? So having that knowledge, having some kind of commercial threat feed, intelligence feed that kind of gives you information as to if you're in logistics, who are the entities that are targeting your companies? Because in that case, you have not only a cyber problem, you have a physical problem. Ask the company in Europe that lost $1 million in Kit Kats off a truck. So, and that had to have started from a network perspective. In other words, the bad guys knew where the Kit Kats were going and were able to steal it. So it's a host of things, and I assume those are their crown jewels. So how do you protect your crown jewels and who's targeting you would be the first two things I would make sure we are aware of and fix them if we don't know.
Darren, you bring an interesting perspective, because I actually would take it a step further as well. You're spot on. They do a threat modeling to run the product or whatever the case may be. And because once you do a threat model, you can actually have a threat profile, right? Like, this is my threat profile. Now, who are the bad threat actors, the ransom gangs and whatnot, that are more likely to attack us, right? I like that approach.
Yeah, and then if you know that, you can go find, there's plenty of write-ups on all of these groups that tell, here's the TTPs, and as Ricoh mentioned previously, the IOCs. So learn what those are and create your systems to look for them, protect against them, and make it harder again for you to become a victim. Have them move down the road to the next company that does the same stuff you do, and they'll have the same protections in place.
Quoting Jean-Claude Van Damme, just be a hard target. Anybody?
Yeah, I got you. That's good.
So, Darren, you referenced the Kit Kat case. Do you have intel that suggests there are threat actors targeting chocolate manufacturers specifically, or?
Yeah, it's the name of the group is non-diabetes, I think is the name of the group.
Okay, guys, now let's get it under control.
Well, a couple things that Ricoh said. I love the submarine analogy, right? Because that really highlights, like, the risks of in insider threats, right? Like if certain person doesn't close this hatch, then you no longer have compartmentalization, which could affect the whole thing. And then you've got outsider threat, right? Which are how do you model those things? And you also mentioned secure by design. And as someone who is very passionate about the authentication space, one of the things that absolutely drives me bonkers is the number of service providers today that still charge a premium, like it's a feature, to be able to use standards like OpenID Connect or SAML 2.0 to help improve your identity posture or allow for single sign-on, to find a balance of, ease of access for the employee, but a centralized identity management platform. And how is it, when there's websites like sso.tax that are trying to shame these vendors into, look, in today's world, it's really not difficult to stick an OIDC library in front of your application and allow the standard to be used. How do we get these companies to think of secure by design as allowing those standards to be available and not charge a premium, right? To use it, and that it should be included. And then taking that a step beyond, how do we get more and more service providers, if the number one path of success is compromised shareable secrets today, how do we get more and more service providers to really implement, strong authentication at the foundation? Like it kind of boggles my mind that pretty much every new tool that's built today is still built with a username and password as the first control that's put in place. And why has that not been improved?
Corey, I had a question for you. Are there things that organizations already have but are not fully leveraging?
I don't think there's any shortage of tools that aren't being leveraged. I mean, talk to any number of security teams that have pieces of their stack that maybe 10% deployed or never used, right? So I think one, it's understanding what you have access to. But I mean, there's native tools, built into the OS and native controls that aren't being leveraged. So I think it's really a matter of taking stock of what you have access to, maybe something you've already invested in, and then decide how to best leverage. But in some cases, some of these teams don't even know what they have to work with.
So what is it that we're doing wrong as industry experts? In the sense that they have stuff, they're not using it. They're not, they don't have proper security hygiene. All of this stuff, why is that? What can we do better? Anybody?
Yeah, one thing I want to definitely pick up on what Corey said and kind of addressing that question you had, Elizabeth, was you can give the people tools. Like I'm running this similar predicament. I have spent like $9-10 million on a specific tool, right? It's across the deal. Mm-hmm. None of my guys know how to use it. And so like, do I have, when I go back to the Army days, right? Do I have the right shooting squad, or do I have the right, PPE? Do I have the right gear? And so like, and last part is, now that we look cool, we're all looking Gucci and whatnot, do we know how to use it, right? One thing I learned in Iraq right before World on Patrol was like, hey, does everybody have a commo? Does everybody know how to use commo? Do you know how to, pop it open, change the battery, and reset? No. Check. We can't go anywhere, right? So these are the fundamental things, and I always apply that to security teams. Like, hey guys, we're the digital defenders of the organization. Does everybody know how to use their gear? Does everybody know how to get in the fight? Because at the end of the day, everybody's a rifleman here, right?
Great point. Anyone else have something on that? So Heath, what's a practical way to strengthen identity security without adding user friction? We talked about this a little bit before, but do you have anything to add on like how to make it easier for the user?
Well, I mean, I just briefly touched on this, right? Like there's standards out there, and we've seen a growth in this, and whether it's companies, there's a lot of companies that do this, but single sign-on, right? So that you can have access to whatever tools that you should have access to through a single point of entry does multiple things, right? It gives the administrators, whoever's in charge of saying, Darren made the statement of like, well, who has access to these things, right? So if you don't have a centralized identity management platform, which really in layman's terms is a single sign-on type of tool, to be able to say everyone goes through this gate, and then being able to manage, okay, well, the sales organization only needs access to these tools, their CRM, their email, those kinds of things. But anyone that's in a certain product department or engineering team that's accessing their CI/CD pipeline, there's $1 or $2 for Buzzwords, sorry. But touching the where the gold is, right? Where is the crown jewels of that organization? They should have different, only certain people should have access to that, and they should have different controls or maybe elevated security on just them. And I think that all starts with, are you using some way to manage, all of your people through a central identity management platform, which really comes down to single sign-on. Now, the problem that we have is you can't secure what you don't know your employees are using, right? So there's this entire world of, well, my employee decided they needed access to this, and whether they used sign in with Google or sign in with Microsoft, which is, Microsoft is still 80% of the enterprise world, but there's a lot of SMBs that use Google as their email, which then becomes their default identity. And they just go sign up for an application using their corporate identity just by signing in with Google. And no one knows that they're using that tool. And what are they putting over there? Right. And I think having some other way to know where are your employees' identities being used. And I think a lot of leaders would be very scared to type in their employee's email address into "Have I been pwned?" and discovering where that's not, maybe it should be.
And I'll add on to that. I've done a bunch of dark web searches for a bunch of companies. Everybody's corporate email is in there somewhere.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so, maybe this is it's a question for Ricoh, but a change that simplifies while improving security. What do you think is a way to simplify things while improving security, Ricoh?
Yeah. One thing is adoption is going to be the biggest obstacle for any practitioner, security practitioner, implementer, or whatever the case may be. If you design your application, if you design your practice with security baked in around the framework, not just like, hey, we're going to push this feature, this is what we're doing, but it's like a security feature, right? And this is what we're doing. It's to complement that, and you bake that in, and then you turn your business line owners, let's just say you have presidents, you have CEOs of different businesses, and I hate saying this, but like you make them because you make them a security professional, because security is a participation in sport, right? Yep. And it's everybody's responsibility. I have yet to meet a CEO where I've worked their breach where they're just like, yeah, that's not my responsibility. That's their responsibility. That's their job. That's their business, right? So if you design it and put it at the forefront of the product or the forefront of the process or whatever the case, I think you have a really good fighting chance.
Right. So we're into our final thoughts section. The question is, you've already talked about what we should stop overcomplicating, but what are your final thoughts on this? Today we were going to strip away, and we did, the buzzwords. What do you want to leave the audience with today? Heath?
I would leave the audience with just, start with the basics, right? Like which you can't secure what you don't know. So you need to do an inventory asset list, right? What are your tools are your employees using? Start there, and then figure out, okay, is there things at risk, right? As Ricoh said, you need to do threat modeling. As Darren said, you got to analyze where is the crown jewels. And starting with the basics of who's got access to what and why, and should they really? I just start there with the basics.
Okay.
And don't think that it's too big. Like, don't think that it's something you can't start with. You can start with that.
Right. Darren.
I would say let's stop overcomplicating risk scoring. It's become a numerology exercise. There's 3x5 maps. There's 5x5 heat maps. There's CVSS scores that are treated like they're gospel. You have a framework that shows a risk from 2 to 12. Well, explain to me what the difference between a 9 risk and a 10 risk is. How does that become a quantifiable thing? Ask yourself 3 questions when you're thinking about risk. Can this risk kill my business? Will it hurt my business? Or will it just annoy my business? And if that's the case, are they likely to occur this quarter, this year, or just eventually? And then figure out how you're going to deal with it at that point. Find your the ones that are going to kill your business in this quarter, address those, come up with what you have to do to mitigate that risk, and then move on to the other ones. So, I don't think we need the math heavy versions that are, asking you to find economists and enumerators and whatever else, to figure out the number part. A risk is a risk. Is it bad or good for your company, and how do you mitigate it?
Right. Yeah. Good point, Corey.
I would say let's make sure we don't continue to overcomplicate what the best practices and what the fundamentals actually are. And to that end, I'm going to reference my good friend, retired FBI Special Agent Scott Augenbaum, who happens to be co-host of Here Comes the Plug, Darren, and I want my check. Who happens to be a co-host for a cool new podcast that they're doing together. I think Darren is sunny to Scott's share, but the consistent messaging there that Scott has been delivering for 20 years now, he's quick to tell you he still does the same presentation 20 years later about what best practices and what fundamentals actually are in the cybersecurity space. So I think we too often assume that things have evolved so much, maybe these best practices and fundamentals don't apply anymore. They apply even more so now. So tune in to hear more of what Darren and
Corey, I would argue that they really haven't evolved at all if we're still using a username and password.
There you go.
Yeah. I will say we're going to call the podcast Scott Filibusters again,
but we decided on a different one.
Good old Scott Augenbaum. I know him.
Yeah, make sure you've got a mute button on him, Darren.
Yeah.
Scott Augenbaum. Yeah.
Go ahead.
He and I actually live in the same area in Nashville, and he and I were doing we were on news together. Like, I know that guy. Like, he's a good dude. And have had
Scott. We've been on with Scott before. He's great. His personality is infectious.
But he's still frustrated with the world, because it's like, like you said, he's running the same messages over and over again, and nobody's listening. So, he says that, but that's not,
I think we all share some of that frustration.
True.
Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to add before we wrap up? No. Okay. Well, it's been a great show. So thanks so much. Perhaps one key takeaway from this show is that security is not failing because we lack technology. It is failing because we're not executing the fundamentals consistently. So go watch the podcast, do your homework, make it easier on yourself by learning how to do stuff. The front door is still the front door and needs to be tended to. As a reminder, the show is recorded and will be available on LinkedIn and on ReadySetCyber YouTube channel. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us on any channel. We're all here and ready to talk. And share as you like with your people. We always appreciate the sharing. Let's keep the dialogue going. Thanks again to our panel for your valuable insights, and to our audience, we appreciate you joining in. Have an excellent morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you on the next Ready, Set, Cyber. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.